which is 10 years before the convention, in fact, was signed. That's the history. A convention that has also 35 years celebration this year. So many celebrations, but let's see also the practice is the most important. Some brief but important logistics first, since this is, as you understood, a hybrid meeting with over 150 participants registered in total. So we will need some basic rules to facilitate the hybrid mode. We will start with introduction of the permanent mission of Belgium, and who is kindly sponsored this side event, followed by interactive dialogue with our panelists. There will be then a space for questions, questions that will be both from you around this room and this table, but also the people online. For participants online, please use the chat to send your questions. I will then share with the full audience and address them to our panelists. We won't be taking orally questions online. Thank you for keeping your camera off and mic muted while attending the meeting online. And for the participants here, you will be able to phrase your questions and just raise your hand and I will give you the floor. But for both cases, please present yourself, be concise, precise, and specify to whom of the panelists you're addressing the question. I will just make a few minutes of introduction on why we chose this difficult subject and why we chose such a diverse panel. I just wanted to say these a few words in introduction. And I will start with a quote on the subject. So millions of children are caught up in a conflict, are caught up in conflicts in which they are not merely bystanders, but by targets. Some fall victims to general or slaughter against civilians. Others die as part of calculated genocide. Still others, children, suffer the effects of sexual violence and the multiple deprivation of armed conflicts that expose them to hunger or disease. Just as shocking, thousands of young people are cynically exploited as combatants. Unquote. It could have been written today, but this was written back in 1996 by Grassa Machel. That's the opening paragraph of her report, the landmark report that you know, that was presented to the UN in this city, in the UN General Assembly, on the impact of armed conflicts on children. And it's a detail, but an important detail, that that report was following an alarm from the UNCRC 3 years before, alarming on children in armed conflict and their situation. During these 28 years, one can say a lot of things happened. The very nature of wars has changed. The war parties have changed. Some of the changes include what can be considered as progress, showing determination to fight against such undisputable human rights violations against children. To state just a few signs of progress, the mandate of the SRSG on children in armed conflict was created just after the report. So we are getting close to the 3rd anniversary. And together, there is a complex mechanism of monitoring, reporting, report to the Security Council, the General Assembly, the Human Rights Council in Geneva. The office is represented here, and they will explain about this, but also the challenges around this mandate. A group of friends, member states of the SRG CAC was created in New York, and another one in Geneva. Permanent mission of Belgium today will speak about perhaps also this, but also from the point of view of a state that has put the fight against violations on children and armed conflict in the highest of its agenda. And it's important that you also share. In May 2000, member states adopted an optional protocol to the Convention on the Rights of the Child on the involvement of children in armed conflict. They ratified by 173 countries. In 2006, another global study, the World Report on Violence by Sergio Pinheiro, provides a wider understanding of the different forms of violence exerted against against children and their devastating impact on children's lives. A report that triggers the creation of a second position of Special Representative of the Secretary General, the one of violence against children. And we are honored today to have SRG Madam Jit with us and to listen to her this year, that is also the celebration of the 15th anniversary of her mandate. And the most recent, in 2019, the Global Study on Children Deprived of Liberty was presented to the General Assembly and to Geneva, and it is dedicating two of its chapters on children deprived of liberty, one on armed conflict and the other one on national security context. I could continue along with what would certainly be considered as progress and positive, but in the eyes of thousands of children who remain victims of war crimes and other gross violations every year, and to the families of those who didn't survive, this is not progress enough. As a reminder, the recently presented report of the Secretary General on children armed conflict, presented to the Security Council just weeks ago, mentions an unprecedented increase, plus 21% of gross violations. Yes, after years of strong protest of civil society, Israel, for example, was finally listed in the so-called list of shame, the annex of the report of the Secretary General on children armed conflict. But we need to wait for the loss of 16,000 children in a few months to apply the rules. In conclusion, we need to go further. Further on, we need to find ways to stop this increasing curve of violence year after year. We need to understand better this need for co-responsibility and co-accountability. And the UNCRC decided this year to dedicate a new general comment, the General Comment 27, which is dedicated to children's access to justice and effective remedies. What if we thought of this in terms of children in our conflict? What if stopping a violation is not enough to defend children's rights, not enough to deter other countries from violating the same rights in full impunity? This is where accountability, justice, effective remedies come in the game changers, as game changers. And it is also the bridge with SDG 16 and 2030 objectives. At the global level, there are now plenty of mechanisms working on accountability, the ICC, the ICJ, the several commissions of inquiry. More and more they pay attention to children and their rights. Their integrated child protection specialists, the special reports dedicated to children. This opening of the high-level political forum 24, which paid particular attention to SDG 16 on peace, justice, and effective institutions, wanted through this distinguished and diverse panel to try to explore and shed light on the game-changing practices, on the need to accelerate innovation and interinstitutional cooperation, simply because it is high time we brought change and made a difference for children in the world. Almost 30 years after the UN General Assembly heard the landmark report of President Michel. Some of the background questions I want all of the panelists to try to keep in mind. How can we make progress achievable by 2030? Referring to the SDGs. How can we measure progress? How can we encourage co-responsibility and co-accountability? How can we create synergies between different accountability monitoring mechanisms? Thank you so much. And without any more delay, I wanted to give the floor to Maria Adelaide Mattei from the Ministry of Education to introduce this panel. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Alex. Madam Special Representative, dear colleagues, I would like to first thank TCI for organizing this important event. We're really pleased to be able to collaborate again. As you mentioned, an important side event that we organized with our mission in Geneva last May on Palestinian children's rights. Ever since Belgium has concluded its presidency of the Security Council Working Group on Children and Armed Conflict in 2020, Belgium has remained a stone supporter of the CAG mandate. The CAG architecture is remarkable. UNICEF and other UN agencies present in country situations identified by the Secretary General monitor and report on the 6 grave violations committed against children, acting like the eyes and the ears of the mandates. The list in annex of the annual report of the Secretary General is a powerful tool for accountability by naming and shaming perpetrators of these 6 grave violations. Members of the Security Council act on this list and negotiate conclusions on country situations where parties to the conflict member states that are parts.
Please keep your mic off in order to permit the
but it's becoming increasingly more politicized. The current picture is remarkable, yet as remarked former Secretary General Ban Ki-moon during the open debate of PAC, perpetrators of violations against children, may it be states or non-state actors, show persistent and blatant disrespect of international law and a sense of impunity. There is a great discrepancy between our legal text, resolutions, norms, and what we see on the ground. In January, new member states will join the Security Council. The PAC working group will have a new chair. In the face of new challenges, there's a need for a renewed commitment by the international community to the protection and promotion of rights of children in our conflicts. And this is a commitment Belgium will continue to take. Thank you.
Thank you so much for this intervention. Now I will ask all the speakers to speak up a little bit because apparently the sound online is breaking, and I will try to improve it in the coming now I'm very happy to give the floor to Najat Malamji, Authority on Violence Against Children, and to ask her how does your mandate, Najat, can contribute to ensure accountability related to the continuum of violence against children in armed conflicts, and how is it complementary to the SRG CAC, who has the mandate on this? And the second question, we have the pleasure to have you here, and I think you are perhaps among the panelists, the one who is dedicated a lot of time on SDGs. And I would ask you to make a bit this bridge and see how we can connect it with SDG 16, how the efforts that member states are doing with the target of 2030, and this connection. Thank you so much.
So, first of all, you are hearing me well. I am really happy to be here. I am seeing faces I know and some I don't know. It's a very young audience, so it's nice. I feel myself younger. So this question really regarding the continuum between the two mandates, VAC and CAC, today represented by Florence, and about the continuum. And as you highlighted, in the beginning, children who have no role in conflicts are paying a huge price worldwide. And, we have many numbers, more 1 in 6 are living in conflict zone. I am sure that maybe it's worse than that. And as you highlight, many of them are dying, injured, victims of becoming orphans, separated from their family. But also millions of children are forcibly displaced from their home as a result of conflict and also armed violence. Millions, we have never to forget, millions and millions of children are living in informal settlement and camps in country of welcoming or transit countries since many, many years. So, and conflicts, as we know, overlap with other crises, such as the climate and financial crisis, and amplify pre-existing social disparities, poverty, food insecurity, and discrimination, further exacerbating the risks and impact of all forms of violence against children. Children who are already vulnerable prior to conflict, children in conflict areas, and children fleeing the conflict within and across countries are on the front line. The 6 grave violations addressed by my colleague Virginia Gamba are closely interlinked with other forms of violence, such as sexual abuse and exploitation, gender-based violence, forced labor, trafficking, smuggling, child marriage, enrollment in criminal groups, and deprivation of liberty, among others. Many, many children are trapped in a cycle of violence, and this cycle continues generation after generation, defining children's life by a continuum of violence before, during, and after conflict situation. After some time, violence becomes normalized as part of the lives of children, and we have to never forget it. They experience, and all of us we know, they experience fear, anxiety, increased risk of self-harm, and an aggravated sense of hopelessness with a severe and long-lasting impact on their development and well-being. I was in the Zaatari camp, and I met children who were in these camps since many years, and the number of self-mutilation and the number of suicide attempts and the number of suicide is huge. So the children are paying a huge tribute, and it's why it's important. With my colleague Virginia, we were discussing also regarding, the pre-, and post-conflict situation. Accountability, and this is a wonderful word currently, related to this continuum of violence against children, before, during, and after conflicts. All of us, we know that it's needed more than ever, because there is an increased failure to uphold international humanitarian and human rights obligation around the world. And we are facing, it's the first time that we are facing that. Millions of children are denied of access to their rights. Those who are destroying their lives and who are violating their rights are not held duly accountable. This is why our respective mandates collaborate and work together very closely in close cooperation with the UN entire system to transform this continuum of violence into a continuum of care and protection. And this means ensuring early warning systems that detect earlier the most vulnerable children, provision of equal access to services and protection for all children, including in humanitarian situations. Child protection has to be seen as a life-saving services, even in emergency. Equal access to child-sensitive justice that provides protection, remedies, and avoids detention of children. Child-friendly border management to prevent trafficking and smuggling. Children's rights, to ensure that children's rights are duly embedded in peace processes, in addition to supporting children to rebuild their lives post-conflict. and really to make sure that all these mechanisms of accountability that are huge are duly working, and to make sure that states and individuals are really held accountable. And most importantly, is listening to and involving children through providing them with safe pathway to express themselves freely. This may be a response for the first question. And regarding SDG 16, SDG 16, as you know, is really the main goal for fostering peaceful, just, and inclusive society which are free from violence. It's really a huge SDG. And we know that there cannot be peaceful, just, and inclusive society without ending all forms of violence against children, including in armed conflict, as highlighted in the two first targets of SDG 16. And at a time of unprecedented levels of violence in all settings, investing, I am using the word, investing in child protection and well-being is needed more than ever. We need to bear in mind also that violence against children in all settings and all the drivers of violence are cutting across the whole 2030 agenda. The 17 SDGs impact the life of children in one way or another. Children's protection and well-being is a cross-sectoral agenda that requires, and this is a problem, an integrated and multi-stakeholder approach that will allow to strengthen child protection system in all settings, including in humanitarian and conflicted areas. And some countries are doing it. We have to really, what is going on in armed conflict and in humanitarian crisis, we know that it's destroying infrastructure, but in child protection, integrated child protection system has to be maintained and strengthened and supported. There is a growing political commitment to highlight and greater action to prevent and end violence against children. But the problem is that they are still action in silos. And what is important is how we are going to sustain this child protection and well-being. And this means investing in strong institutions, in strong services that are accountable and that are accessible to all children, even in humanitarian and conflicted settings. And this is very important. And this is not happening very well. And it means also involving and empowering communities, children, youth, and women, and families that will support the development of a culture of peace and lawfulness. And this means, and this is where we have a problem, to be very frank, full adherence to international humanitarian and human rights law to ensure child protection are protected before, during, and after the conflict. To this end, strengthening synergies within and between states, the UN, civil society, and other key stakeholders is essential through sustainable and context-specific cooperation, partnership, and support. And we are facing a big failure of multilateralism and cooperation. This must strengthen child and gender-sensitive prevention and protection system in all settings, including in humanitarian and conflicted areas. Child-sensitive justice, Jennifer will be happy, including transitional justice, alternative to deprivation of liberty, and repatriation of children detained in private camps. Providing legal identity and documentation to address statelessness. Addressing trafficking and illegal adoption associated with conflict. Ensuring, and here we need to push more, prompt and impartial investigation into alleged crimes against children and holding states, as well as individuals responsible for such violation accountable. Listening to and involving children in all matters related to them. I just want to remind you that less than 6 years remain to achieve the 2030 agenda. Millions of children and millions of their rights are left behind. It is our duty to protect them and address gaps in the accountability for violence against children. And what is important for me, and when we are failing, to be very frank, and when we can push, is how we are going to use all these mechanisms to end impunity. And here is even the children who I met during all are asking for accountability, for equality, and for justice in its broadest sense. I think that, access to justice is not penal and civil, it's also social justice. It has really to make sure that, and this is the SDG 16, and it's really, really important to have this in mind. Another point that is important is to regarding, and it highlights the issue, it will make my last point, the multilateralism and cooperation. To switch from donor-driven and geopolitical interests to really strengthening the systems in all the countries, even in humanitarian settings. And this is where we are missing, and this, I hope that we will discuss that to push more this agenda. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Najat. And very important points you raised, and perhaps for the discussion to follow up after with questions. Now I have the pleasure to give the floor to Florence Gaspard from the Office of the SRG, the second mandate we have at the UN, with whom both of them were working very closely as civil society, and we're trying to make things happen. So Florence, I wanted to ask you, what are the mechanisms available for the CAC mandate to hold the perpetrators of violation against children accountable, the subject of our work, and ensure access to justice for child victims? And also, what are the challenges in this process? I'm sure there are. And how can those mechanisms be reinforced, including a few recent examples, if you can give us, of good practices in this respect? Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Alex. And it's true, we are
If you can speak up.
working very closely together. It's a very big question. I'm not sure I would be able to cover it all, but to ask a question afterwards. Maria Adelaide has touched base on the CAC mandate, and Alex as well. But so sorry if I repeat a little bit what has been said. And I would like to thank the organizer for the invitation to speak to this side event, where we take stock of the progress and achievements of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, with a focus of this year's high-level political forum on Sustainable Development Goal 16. As you know, the 2030 Agenda and its SDGs represent a transformative framework for addressing the challenges our world is facing today, including critical intersection of peace, justice, and the rights of children. SDG 16, which focuses on promoting peace, justice, strong institutions, as it was mentioned by Najat, is particularly vital in this regard. It emphasized through its target 16.2 the link between peace, accountability, justice, and the need to protect children from all forms of violence. As again, it was mentioned by Najat. Ensuring the fulfillment of the rights of children, including in armed conflict, providing effective access to justice when those rights are violated, and holding those who violate those rights accountable for their crimes are therefore fundamental steps to achieving the SDGs. Yet, the lack of accountability for violation committed against children continues to undermine long-term peace and stability. As it was mentioned by Maria Adelaide, since 1999, the systematic engagement of the UN Security Council has placed the protection of children affected by armed conflict at the heart of its international peace and security agenda. The Council adopted resolutions to request the UN to gather and verify information detailing why, how, when children are affected by armed conflict, as well as to report back to the Security Council with this information. The Council has asked the UN Secretary General to name parties to conflict who recruit and use children, kill and maim children, commit rape and sexual violence on children, attack schools and hospitals. As it was mentioned, the Secretary General list of parties to conflict come with an additional request. It's not only the list of naming and shaming. And for our office, this is the most important. But it's true Alex, that it is usually how it is seen. It is to engage, so all parties who are included in this list of the SG annual report on children and armed conflict must engage with the UN, with the special representative of the Secretary General, to develop action plan to end and prevent violation against children. In 2018, the Security Council made clear through its resolution 2427 that protecting children and establishing early warning and preventive action in that regard are both key to conflict prevention and post-conflict recovery. But it's also stressed the importance of ensuring accountability for all violation and abuse against children who are in conflict. This forms the basis of the Security Council architecture on children and armed conflict. In addition to the Security Council architecture, as it was mentioned today, on children and armed conflict, the Convention on the Rights of the Child and its optional protocol, including the optional protocol on the involvement of children in armed conflict, have played a critical role in ensuring accountability for violations for children's rights. These instruments establish clear international legal standards that set the age of a child and any individual below 18-year-old. It also prohibits the recruitment and use of children in hostility. It provides the protection of children against all forms of violence, and it requests member states to implement measures for the reintegration of children released from conflict. These tools and instruments have delivered positive results, not sufficient enough, but positive results. First, over 40 action plans have been signed with parties to the conflict, which led to the release of more than 200,000 children from the ranks of armed group and armed force. So that's one of the biggest achievements of this children and armed conflict peace and security architecture, probably, or the one which is the most known or talked about. But moreover, those action plans include a number of measures promoting accountability for grave violation. Prevention plans have also been adopted in the Philippines and in Ukraine, including similar measures, which led to a decrease in the number of violations committed against children. And second, the Convention on the Rights of the Child has become the most widely ratified human rights treaty. And OPAC has now been ratified by 173 state parties. Third, many countries have criminalized the sixth grade violation against children and have endorsed political commitments such as the Paris Principle, the Vancouver Principle, the Safe School Declaration, and the political declaration on the use of explosive weapons in populated areas. Also, our office and its partners continue encouraging accountability efforts by supporting both national and international justice mechanisms. And I would like to give you two concrete examples. In Colombia, we are supporting the national justice authorities to their process of investigating and prosecuting alleged crime against children perpetrated during the conflict. And the International Criminal Court, our office, and other UN entities, we have submitted an amicus curiae brief in the case of the prosecutors versus Dominique Ongwen, which has led the trial chamber ordering collective community-based reparation to victims of war crime and crimes against humanity, which were committed by Dominique Ongwen in northern Uganda between 2002 and 2005. These successes should, however, not let us forget the bleak reality. As it was mentioned by Alex, the latest report of the Secretary General on children and armed conflict has showed that children have continued to bear the brunt of multiplying and escalating crises at alarming levels. And it was reflected by nearly 33,000 grave violations committed against children in 2023 alone. And it is the highest number of the annual violations that were recorded in almost 10 years. So we haven't had such a high level of violation committed against children in armed conflict since 10 years. Despite the solid international consensus I have just described, and clear obligation under international law, including human rights law and humanitarian law, parties to the conflict have blatantly trampled on child rights with little or no consequences. While signatures, ratifications, endorsements of national and international framework are commendable first steps, they do not have much meaning for children if not systematically implemented and translated into concrete actions. To end the cycle of violence faced with children affected conflict, we must ensure that the perpetrators of these crimes are held accountable, and criminalizing child rights violation in domestic legislation, ensuring obligation under international human rights and humanitarian law are upheld, systematically investigating and prosecuting those who are responsible for child rights abuse, and building national capacities to that end. And when I see all those young people, I think you are really well placed. We should invest in you and build child protection capacity with your support. And also removing obstacles for children effective access to justice and reparation, including by facilitating their active role in the judicial process in a safe and protected environment, as it was mentioned. Lastly, accountability for children affected by armed conflict should not only be regarded as a remedy, but also as a prevention measure. Reinforcing the rule of law, alerting communities, and effectively investigating and prosecuting and repairing crimes and violations committed against children will contribute deterring potential perpetrators and ensuring that children are safe from future violations. This also includes delivering on improved reintegration support for boys and girls who are released from armed force and armed ranks. Several initiatives have recently been undertaken to support these efforts, to name a few. So our office has provided input to the new policy on children of the Office of the International Criminal Court of the Prosecutor, which enhance the attention and capacity and competence to address and prioritize crime affecting children, and ensure that the voice of children are heard in all the diversity. Our office also welcomes, as it was mentioned, the Committee on the Rights of the Child decision to draft a general comment on children's rights to access justice and effective remedies. We will contribute to this process. And finally, our office was pleased to launch last month a new e-learning module developed by Save the Children and Justice Rapid Response to mainstream a child rights lens in justice and accountability efforts. The adoption of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and its Sustainable Development Goals marked a significant milestone in our collective effort to create a just, equitable, and sustainable world. As we are now standing halfway to 2030, the upcoming Summit of the Future and Pact for the Future are critical opportunities to reaffirm our commitments, accelerate progress, and ensure that no one, especially children, is left behind. All of us, we must do our part to ensure that children have the place they deserve in this pact, because we cannot decide on the future without those who will lead it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Laurence, for this very good presentation, for the challenges, also sharing the challenges and also some progress and good practices. I think we have to base this and accelerate the process because indeed the figures are not good and we need to make something to change the current situation. I have now the pleasure to give the floor, if technology permits, to Jamil Khan. Jamil, he comes from Afghanistan, and in fact, Jamil arrived as an unaccompanied minor in Greece. Sorry for the black the screen. In fact, in Greece, some 7 years ago, what I want him is, of course, to share his experience. He is now not a child anymore. He is working with the Ministry of Migration as
And in Greece.
in Greece. He's working with unaccompanied children as also mentor. So I want him to share his story, first of all, and secondly, perhaps to give us a few ideas on why, on our discussion today, why accountability could be important, in fact, for children, for unaccompanied children. He has seen, apart from his own cases, he has seen several of them coming from many countries. Afghanistan itself is a country that it's an interesting case to learn from, although the results are not there. Let's learn from our mistakes. And secondly, if you can tell us why peace processes and efforts for peace should include children and young people, and what would have been the change, for instance, if in Afghanistan they have heard a little bit their voices. Thank you. The floor is yours, Jamil.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me?
Very well, thank you.
Okay, so good morning, everyone. I hope you're all well. I'm very happy to meet all of you. I could not be there because I was denied a visa because I'm a refugee and I'm from Afghanistan, which is, I think, somehow clear for all of you. They didn't give me the visa, but it's completely fine. I can meet you now online. It's completely fine. So I would like to introduce myself first, and then I would like to answer the question, and I will answer it in two parts. My name is Jamil Khan. I'm from Afghanistan, but I grew up and went to school in Pakistan, and it has been almost 7 years that I'm living in Greece. I came to Greece as an unaccompanied minor, and I was living in a refugee camp in a safe zone. Safe zone is a place where unaccompanied minors are living, and they have like different staff members that they are taking care of them. So I was living there. I started my high school, and then when I became 18, I could speak many languages, so I started working. And I'm sorry for the parrots, I couldn't take them out, so you will hear them. So when I became 18, I started working as a cultural mediator and translator in the International Organization for Migration. And in the meantime, in the evening, I was going to the high school. I worked there for 4 years in the long-term accommodation centers in the big refugee camps with almost 15,000 refugees. And I finished my high school. At the moment, I'm working as a mentor for unaccompanied minors in the Ministry of Migration and Asylum in Greece. And in the meantime, I'm doing my bachelor in international relations and European affairs in the American College of Greece. And it has been almost 1 year that I'm a youth ambassador in the Defense for Children International in Greece. So now I would like to answer the question. It's very important to achieve justice and accountability for children and young people because they are the future of the world. Everything which is going on and controlled by people will be replaced by these children and young people in the next 20 to 30 years. That's why it's very important for society to treat children with dignity and compassion, guaranteeing fair and equal treatment free from all kind of discrimination, protecting them from any kind of abuse, exploitation and violence, and advance the right of children express the children and the young people express his or her views freely and to be heard. That's why there must be strict legal frameworks fundamentally which are easily accessible for children and young people to report and to talk freely if they are treated badly, and the perpetrator should be accountable for their wrongdoing indiscriminately. When I use the word indiscriminately, because even though I'm far away at the moment from Afghanistan, I'm far away from the countries where there is conflict, but still it's crystal clear, it's obvious that there are laws globally in place for children, for young people, and generally for human beings. But these laws affect some specific parties, and these law doesn't affect the other parties. So it's obvious the people which are really powerful and they have the power in their end, they are not affected by these laws. So when we talk about the protection of the children, and when we talk about justice and accountability, it's very important to know the root cause. And I think almost all of us, we know what is the root cause. There are wars which are created by some powerful people for their own good, for their own profit, which is leading all these children and young people to be in this bad situation. So that's why it's very important that all the people, all the perpetrators which are doing the wrong, or which are doing all these wrongdoing, they have to be accountable for this, and there must be a specific mechanism which is more powerful than all these people, so they can talk and they can keep these people accountable for their wrongdoing. And the second one, for the peace building, it's very important for the children and for the young people to participate in decision making, for their ideas and what they think and how they feel, it has to be heard, because children and youth can contribute to peace building and conflict prevention by actively participating in decision making. They are significant segment of any society, and their perspective and voices must be heard in peace building and conflict prevention. For example, I will give you an example, even that now we are working, for example, in many shelters, the shelters in which the unaccompanied minors are living, for example, there are people, professionals, which are working there. Sometimes when there are tensions or conflicts, even if the professional, they spend like days or weeks, most of the time they cannot solve this conflict or they cannot release the tensions. So finally, when they sit with the children, when they sit with them, when they discuss, when they talk with them, after that they can come to a conclusion that how they can solve the conflict. So it's very clear that the children and the young people have to participate in the decision making. But unfortunately, I will talk only about Afghanistan at the moment, that there are some societies and some countries, for example, especially Afghanistan, in which the people, they don't take serious the opinions of children and young people, and they think they don't know about it, even though when they put a child, a 10 years old child, to work and to earn money, they don't think that this is a child and he shouldn't work. But when it comes to the decision making, only the people that they have the power and they are like adults, they have to decide for everyone. So this has to change. Fortunately, there are some countries, especially some European countries, that they are doing it, they are implementing this, they are listening, they are hearing the children and the young people opinions and ideas. But unfortunately, on the big part of the world, it's not happening. So this is what I wanted to say. Thank you a lot. If there is any question or something.
Thank you so much, Jamil. It's always very interesting. Please stay on, and I'm sure there will be questions to you. But also, if you have questions to other panelists, do not hesitate to come in later on in the question and answer part. Our next speaker is Bethany Ellis, and I have a big pleasure to give her the floor. She is the Global Advocacy Advisor of Watchlist for Children in Armed Conflict, an organization as DCI, we are members, but many other NGOs are part of it. And an organization we believe it's a key to work on in this area. And what I wanted to ask her, she could say a lot of things, but in 10 minutes we have to make choices. So I would like perhaps to give you, because it's a diversified also audience. There are not only us people working on CAC and specialists, there are many people from SDGs. And I want you to explain what is the role of civil society in New York in this area. What is the role of Watchlist with civil society, and how you are interacting with the different stakeholders, be it governments, be it Security Council members, the working group of the Security Council, SRGCAC, all these actors, and what is our role? Thank you so much.
Thank you, Alex, and thank you to all the organizers and my fellow panelists here. As Alex mentioned, my name is Bethany Ellis. I'm the Global Advocacy Advisor for Watchlist on Children in Armed Conflict, and Watchlist is a network of 16 human rights and humanitarian organizations dedicated to ending grave violations against children in armed conflicts and guaranteeing their rights. As a network, we work here in New York to defend and support implementation of the UN's Children in Armed Conflict agenda, including the annual report of the Secretary General on Children in Armed Conflict, the mandate of the SRSG, CAC, Ms. Virginia Gamba, the monitoring and reporting mechanism, and the Security Council working group on CAC. We also work to mainstream child protection concerns into the broader work of the Security Council. In terms of accountability, kind of already mentioned several of these tools around CAC, and I think it's important to note here that the CAC agenda is focused at the level of the armed group or armed force, not necessarily at the individual perpetrators. Some of these mechanisms I'm speaking about are really at the group or force level. However, its mechanisms can serve as a catalyst for strengthened accountability, including working towards adoption of legislation outlawing the 6 grave violations, supporting efforts to bring individual perpetrators to account, appointing relevant child protection focal points in government ministries or armed forces, developing and implementing handover protocols to ensure that children are not criminalized or treated as security threats merely for their association with an armed group or armed force. And all of these efforts can be made concrete in the form of a joint action plan, as already mentioned by Florence, signed with the UN, and can be reinforced and encouraged through engagement of the Security Council working group, including through its conclusions. In all of these UN mechanisms, civil society is actively playing a role as well. Civil society organizations are involved in contributing to the monitoring and reporting mechanism in country, in providing direct services such as reintegration programs and supports for children formerly associated with armed forces and armed groups, and advocating for policy change to strengthen child protection legislation and policies at the national and international levels, as just some examples of what civil society is doing. Civil society also can provide complementary information and insights into the situation on the ground for children. The monitoring and reporting mechanism generated reports have the strength of providing verified information about the 6 grave violations. However, that sometimes means that discussions about these grave violations can happen months or even years after they've been committed. So information from civil society partners with the presence in the relevant conflict-affected area can provide additional insights to help member states consider a full picture of the situation for children and to demonstrate what patterns of violations and harm for children may have improved or deteriorated since the end of the reporting periods. Here in New York, Watchlist works with our partners to support an effective and well-functioning Security Council working group on children in armed conflict, including engaging with the working group members on a regular basis, including during the negotiation of country-specific conclusions, which are a set of recommendations that the Council agrees to put forward for the parties to conflict around the ending and preventing of grave violations against children. We engage with group members ahead of their field visits to conflict-affected areas. We organize 2 NGO roundtables with the working group members a year. And also we organize an annual policy workshop that's helping to strengthen discussion and collaboration between stakeholders working on CAC and those who are on the Security Council Working Group. We actively and consistently advocate with the members of the working group, and particularly the working group chairs, to ensure that all of the tools that are available to them are being leveraged. So they have actually a whole list of what's called their toolkits of actions that they can, member states can be taking as part of the working group to address grave violations. And we also support member states in their individual capacity in mainstreaming child protection concerns, including in their engagement on the council, such as ahead of the renewal of mandates for UN peacekeeping or special political missions. Civil society also has a role to play in holding member states and the UN accountable as well, seeking to ensure that resolutions are implemented and followed up on, and that mandates are fulfilled. From the watch list side, this is most visibly manifest in our advocacy efforts ahead of the Secretary General's annual report on children in armed conflicts, and as we mentioned quite a bit, the annexed list of perpetrators. So in recent years, watch lists, our members and others have raised concerns about what we saw as gaps between the evidence that was provided in the narrative of the reports and those armed groups and armed forces who were included in the annexed list of shame, with some parties, particularly state armed forces, evading listing for years despite consistent evidence of grave violations. So this was the inspiration behind what is now one of WatchList's flagship publications, which is our annual Credible List report. Since 2017, WatchList has published recommendations ahead of the Secretary General's annual report on new perpetrators that should be included in the listing. Additional grave violations for which already listed perpetrators should be listed, and sometimes the addition of new situations of concerns, new conflict situations to be covered in the report. We are also engaged in a number of both private and public advocacy efforts around the annual report's publication, calling attention to the need for all perpetrators to be held to the same standards and recalling that listing and delisting decisions should be evidence-based and consistent with criteria established in 2010. As has been mentioned a few times here, the listing mechanism is a critical step in a process of accountability. So seeking to strengthen compliance with international law, and it triggers the formal establishment of some of these mechanisms that have been mentioned, such as the monitoring and reporting mechanism, the country task force on monitoring and reporting, and the Security Council working groups discussions. And as Laurent mentioned, obligating the listed party to engage with the UN on an action plan in order to be removed from the list. Given this key role that the listing plays, it's crucial that the message sent with the report each year is crystal clear that grave violations against children are unacceptable by any perpetrator and that there will be consequences for those who violate children's rights. As many of us have acknowledged, the situation that we're facing now is grave and bleak. We have the report that just came out last month where we saw the highest level ever of grave violations verified. And so it's in this moment, we think it's really critical to shore up these sets of really strong tools that we do have established that have been effective at creating behavior change and strengthening accountability in the past. So that means political support to these mechanisms, to the decisions made by the mandates, and to their ability to engage with armed parties. It means resources, and I'll take a moment to acknowledge and thank the Permanent Mission of Belgium for their support to the MRM, and to recenter children at the heart of these discussions over politics, and to leverage all the tools that we have available to support concrete actions to end grave violations and to support accountability. And what I think we've heard now from all of our speakers and was very powerfully put by Jamil, it is crucial that the voices of children are able to participate in these processes as well. So it's kind of a multi-step view of accountability, both in more accountability for the specific perpetrator, but also holding ourselves and our system of protecting children in armed conflict accountable as a community as well.
Thank you so much, Bethany. Thank you for the good work you're doing. Thank you for adding value that as individual NGOs, we're all trying to contribute, but I think together we can also have an added value to this process and try to bring change. So thank you for reviewing all this and for intensifying the efforts. Now I have the pleasure to give the floor to Abdul Manaf Kemokai. Manaf, he's the executive director of Defense for Children International in Sierra Leone. He has been working there for many, many years. And despite his young age, what I want him to reply is to see also the Sierra Leone as a case of a country which was in armed conflict. Fortunately, it's not there anymore. And from the national experience that you have been living there, including with the young people, perhaps never heard of war, to explain how does involving children in peace processes can be important. Again, this question, why it's important to integrate their perspectives in these efforts, and with a view of Sierra Leone and how you see the situation there. Thank you so much, Florian.
Okay. Thank you very much, Alex. Madam Najat, and also the permanent mission from Belgium and fellow colleagues. Thank you, Alex, for giving me the floor. And I want to address this topic from the perspective of a phrase, which I will refer to as the making and unmaking of child soldiers. Because in Sierra Leone, between 1991 and 2002, we had brutal war, and there were a lot of children who were recruited as child soldiers. So it is important to start looking at that from that perspective. In this world, no child is born as a child soldier, neither a victim, unless if maybe when you were in your mother's womb, something may have happened for you to become victim. But children are normally made as child soldiers or victims by people or institutions based on the prevailing circumstances, which in this case is child soldiers. They have lost a lot of things, including schooling. They may have left behind their colleagues, and also all other development processes. They also have psychological as well as physical impact. So they are in this situation. How do you unmake them? So unmaking them should really be based on justice that will also involve the real engagement of children. What we have seen over the years is that most often, including even the Sierra Leonean experience, when people are held accountable for human rights violations against children, like in our own case, there was establishment of the special court to try people who had the grievous responsibility for the war, especially recruitment of children and all that happened in relation to violations of the rights of children. But a lot of the efforts were really skewed towards penalizing those who bear the greatest responsibility. But little was really done to ensure that these children were unmade. And unmaking in this case is really talking about recovery. How do we ensure that they have recovered and they are also able to catch up with the development that they have been delayed from? Most often, programs that are there to rehabilitate or to make sure that children recover are normally humanitarian, that are donor-driven, as was said by Najat. And they are implemented based on what is provided, not even necessarily based on what is available, because if it is a priority, then maybe more can be invested in it. So if you look at the Sierra Leonean situation, you will see the chunk of the resources that we are used, we are really dedicated towards the trials of those who bear the greatest responsibility, and little invested on the recovery of the children. And now, if we want to shift from that, which is really the real justice, really ensuring that justice is also based on the recovery, and that recovery should be based on the needs of the children at that time. There is a whole argument that we have to make sure that the very children who are the victims should be involved. They should really participate in the designing of their own recovery program. And that recovery program should be right-based, also based on decisions from the judicial systems that we are talking about, so that it's not just humanitarian. And when it is judicial decision, it can also enable children to claim their rights within the process when probably things are not done in the way they want it. So this is very important to ensure that constantly the children who are the victims are engaged. They are also really participating and also ensuring that the design of the program is responding to their own needs. And there is a system in place to also claim their rights when this is not done. This is the same for the peace process, because peace process should also really be linked to justice. We often say there's no peace without justice. So in Sierra Leone, there were two transitional mechanisms that were really established after the war. Of course, I have just cited one, which is the Special Court. The other one was the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Of course, for the Special Court, which tried those who bear the greatest responsibility, children were not really involved, which is, of course, also our campaign, because we did not want children to be tried as perpetrators, but they should be looked at as victims. Of course, a handful number of them only participated as witnesses. But then also in the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, only a handful of children really participated in the process. Alongside these two transitional mechanisms, there was also the demobilization program, which was really meant to rehabilitate the victims, including the child soldiers. But as I said earlier, it was much donor-driven, not right-based, and it was much humanitarian. So only a handful of children or youths really benefited, not as much as even they would have desired, or not not commensurate to what they suffered and also what they lost. And like I said, there was not really any justice mechanism in place for these children to claim, at least to hold the institutions or people or the states accountable for not meeting their needs. So what, as far as we are concerned, should really shift, should be the game changer, the new change, is to ensure that these judicial processes, the peace processes, should really hook on the recovery of children as priority, and they should be right-based. Any program done, they should be right-based, so that the system itself, the judicial system itself, or the peace process itself, becomes enabler for children to recover. So this is very important for our discussions today. So in summary, I would say, yes, it is very critical for children to fully participate in peace building process as well as accountability processes. But there should be priority on their recovery based on right-based approaches for the programs. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bernard. Thank you for emphasizing this, which is the best interest of the child. It's first its mental and physical health in this case. And we see it in recent conflict as well as in Sierra Leone. So we really need to learn from these cases, and also the donors perhaps are the ones who have also to go through the learning process. And it's also one of our roles of civil society to be loud also on this. And I want to give the floor to the Human Rights Watch. We have the pleasure to have with us Zamanev, who is the Executive Director of the Child Rights Division of Human Rights Watch. Human Rights Watch has been a big partner of us for many cases, in particular for the global study and children deprived of liberty and others. And what I wanted to ask you, Zama, in complementarity of what we heard, is to speak to us a little bit about the international accountability mechanisms. They are different, but how we can contribute to them, how we can use them, how we can interact with the different stakeholders. What role the different stakeholders have in this mechanism? I know it's not the same. What is the role of human rights defenders, child human rights defenders, international organizations? There is a lot of inputs inside, and how we can put some order on this, and how we can enhance this complementarity between the mechanism. The other question I had for you is how, because I know with Human Rights Watch you're working a lot on documenting, and many of us who are in the field, we are documenting crimes, war crimes, and crimes against children in armed conflict. So how we can organize better this information in order to contribute to the accountability mechanism. Thank you so much. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you to you, Alex, and to DCI for organizing this panel. And thank you to my fellow panelists for the opportunity to participate with you all today in this discussion. Colloquially, violations against children are understood as the worst of the worst. But when it comes to accountability, especially international accountability, children have really not been a priority. Despite the construction of an oppressive architecture, children have been second class when it comes to actual consequences for violations and crimes against them. There's been more progress on some violations than others, for example, child recruitment. But when it comes to, for example, for education-related violations, we really have a long way to go. Today, I want to cover 4 points. First, to touch briefly on the law, what warring parties should be held accountable for. Second, to quickly highlight key avenues for accountability. Third, to talk about the barriers to accountability for crimes and violations against children. And then fourth, to talk about how accountability can be strengthened, some recommendations. And I'm going to use as a primary point of reference education-related violations, drawing on over a decade of collaboration with the Global Coalition to Protect Education from Attack, GCPF. And I'm also doing this because I think this is a particular area that's ripe for progress and will benefit so many children. Now, so that we're on the same page with respect to education-related violations, I'll use the Global Coalition's definition of attacks, which is threatened or actual use of force against students, teachers, academics, education officials, and also buildings or school resources and facilities. We'll also talk about military use of schools, meaning schools used as barracks or bases or to store weapons or training grounds. This is not an attack per se, but is a preventable and yet very prevalent cause of attacks. And attacks on education are a serious problem. A new report from the Global Coalition, Education Under Attack 2024, that was released last month, found that in the last 2 years, in 2022 and 2023, there were around 6,000 reported attacks on education, incidences of military use of schools and universities that harmed more than 10,000 students and educators around the world. This was, on average, 8 attacks on education every day. We also found that attacks on education and military use increased by nearly 20% in 2022 and 2023 compared to the 2 previous years. And I'll note that that trend very much aligns with the new Secretary General's annual report on children in armed conflict, which also found a disturbing and significant increase in violations against children. But I want to just say a word or two about that because I'm hearing so much discouragement about the dramatic increase in violations and the question, are things working? And I think we need to, look at how this correlates simply with an increase in conflict. to also acknowledge there are some things that are working that we may have documented far more violations if we hadn't been doing some of those things. But also to say this increase brings so much more urgency, the need to lean into accountability, where there is so much that can be done and yet is not being done. Very quickly, what are warring parties to be held accountable for? Again, I'll use attacks on education as the reference point. First, in international law, we look at gross violations of international human rights law, education, life, liberty, security, the prohibition on discrimination. Second, in situations of armed conflict, attacks on education may be lawful in some circumstances, but in other instances, there are violations of the laws of international humanitarian law. This would be when there are attacks on civilians, students and teachers, or civilian objects, schools. So human rights law, laws of war. Third is where attacks on education or violations against children can attract criminal responsibility, in particular for war crimes. For example, using the Rome Statute, which is the law that establishes the International Criminal Court. So, for example, you could have a prosecution for an attack on a building dedicated to education, or crimes against humanity when committed as part of widespread and systematic attack against the civilian population. And we'll talk a little bit more about denial of education as crime against humanity, perhaps in the question and answer session. In addition to these three areas, there are complementary voluntary commitments that promote compliance with the laws of war and human rights law that countries can sign up to and that non-state armed groups can sign up to. And I'll highlight two. The first are the deed of commitment to protect children in armed conflict that's promoted by the organization Geneva Call. There are actually 31 armed groups and de facto authorities that have signed Geneva Call's deed of commitment on children. And this includes protections for education and avoiding use of schools for military purposes. And second is the Safe Schools Declaration, which is a non-binding political commitment launched in 2015. It's now been endorsed by 120 countries and includes very strong commitments around the protection of education during war. And it includes a specific commitment to investigate allegations of violations of applicable law and to prosecute perpetrators. So we have accountability baked in the Safe Schools Declaration, also signed by 120 countries to promote better compliance with human rights and international humanitarian law. In addition to international law, we have domestic law, including ordinary criminal law, but domestic law should also incorporate the laws of war into the domestic legal framework. And I'll highlight specifically that there are several countries now that actually criminalize the military use of schools, including the Central African Republic and the Philippines. So perhaps a model for other countries in the future. Okay, so that's very quickly the laws that warring parties should be held accountable for following. How can they be held accountable? We've heard already about a lot of different mechanisms, from non-judicial mechanisms, including those established by the UN Security Council, the Human Rights Council, the General Assembly, and the investigative bodies that they create. The very important UN monitoring and reporting mechanism on children in armed conflict. We have treaty bodies, which are committees that monitor the implementation of human rights treaties. We have special rapporteurs, a range of entities that could provide a sort of form of non-judicial stigma, penalties, other consequences. Then we have international and regional courts, and then we have domestic legal proceedings. And states ultimately really have the primary duty to investigate and prosecute. But there are also domestic human rights institutions that are non-judicial. We've heard about truth and reconciliation processes, ombuds people, domestic human rights institutions. So there are a range of mechanisms there. And of those, we have seen some positive developments, especially, I would say, with non-judicial entities, and especially in the area of child soldiers, which was, of course, the impetus for establishing the monitoring and reporting mechanism, but also there are good examples of domestic law, including here in the United States, the Child Soldiers Prevention Act. We heard about action plans, which countries that are put on the warring parties that are put on the list of shame are supposed to sign with the UN. Florence mentioned that there are over 40 that have been signed, and I understand that some of those include provisions on education, for example, South Sudan and Yemen. So these are commitments that warring parties have to make, for example, to not attack schools and avoid using schools for military purposes. There are also good examples, uneven but good examples from UN fact-finding mechanisms that have had some dedicated reports on children really in strong part because they've had child rights experts. And just one example is the Commission of Inquiry on Syria, where they've had very powerful, dedicated reports on the rights of children. But when it comes to prosecutions, we are not in a remotely sufficient situation. Now, the Global Coalition has new research coming out later this year, where we looked and we're only able to find very few examples of prosecution of education-related crimes. At the domestic level, we found 4 prosecutions of education-related crimes as war crimes: Bosnia and Herzegovina, Serbia, Kosovo, and the Democratic Republic of Congo. At the international level, education-related crimes to date have only just featured in 2 prosecutions of the International Criminal Court. I will note that there's a new policy on children that was mentioned at the International Criminal Court. I think a very strong policy that is, I think, very promising. We hope to really see it implemented, but also perhaps used as a model for other courts to better integrate children in their policies. We also found 5 cases for the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia, but no cases where education is featured in indiscriminate or disproportionate attacks on schools and students that would amount to war crimes, but not reach the threshold of targeting schools deliberately. This is a very small number of cases, and this impunity has been condemned by the UN Security Council, UN treaty bodies like the Committee on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights and the Committee on the Rights of the Child have all called on states to conduct prompt and impartial investigation of attacks on education and military use of schools and to prosecute perpetrators. So why? What are the barriers to accountability? And if you're interested more in this topic, I'll just really encourage you to look at an excellent report from Save the Children and Oxford University called Advancing Justice for Children that goes in depth on what some of these barriers are. To highlight them briefly, I mean, there has been a historical indifference to children in justice processes, not seeing children as rights holders, but as just beneficiaries. So it's nice if they get stuff like education, but they aren't holding the right to education. I would say running throughout this all is misogyny, and the fact that working on children's behalf and children's rights is still feminized and seen as a lower priority. There can be defects in the law if denial of education is not a crime or education is not recognized as a right in the law. It makes it harder to prosecute. This is also a larger issue around the separation between economic, social, and cultural rights that are not, the denial of which is not necessarily criminalized. In many instances, there's simply a lack of expertise in investigating, analyzing, and prosecuting crimes against children. And that can include a fear, I think, well-founded fear of interviewing children, but these are skills that can be acquired to interview children safely and properly. And at the same time, there's sort of a reduction of saying, if we can't interview children, then we can't prosecute crimes against children, when in fact, especially in the area of attacks on education, there's a lot of different kinds of evidence. And also to say that where there have been crimes and violations against children addressed, it's been often really reduced to child recruitment for boys and sexual and gender-based violence for girls, all of which are important, but in no way cover the range of violations that children are experiencing and deserve justice for. So how can we strengthen the documentation, investigation, and prosecution of child rights violations in armed conflict? I have 3 recommendations. First is to prioritize children. We've heard that. What does it mean? Every investigation should employ a child rights approach, meaning first, ensuring violations and crimes affecting children are considered in every investigation. Ask how children are affected. And second, that in the process of investigating and bringing prosecutions, that children's rights are respected. So one is sort of the lens through which you're looking, and the other is how you treat children in the process. And this has to start at the top. One encouraging example that we've recently seen is the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court giving a strong investigation of the new child rights policy. We really need to see this message from the top of every single accountability mechanism. But child rights experts have to be at the table when priorities are set. And I've seen this in my own experience. It's not just a question of saying, oh, well, we picked a child rights issue. If you don't have the expertise at the table, are you picking the most strategic and grave violation that's out there? There was a mention of Justice Rapid Response's new course on integrating a child rights approach into accountability. in every investigation for everyone to consider child rights and how children are affected. And most of that work, there's some specialized work, but most of it can be done by every investigator. And so I'd really like to see this considered a core skill in every mechanism. Can you investigate and document abuses against the people who are most affected? And, on a very practical level, I'd like to see it in every job posting. I think that would really encourage the building of skills that can be acquired to safely and ethically investigate violations against children. Okay. First is prioritization. Second is data collection. And this is really an area where the progress we've made so far shows that it's totally possible. You can see it in just the evolution of the data that's collected in the monitoring reporting mechanism once it was added as a violation. And data came in first where it combined attacks on schools and hospitals. And now we're moving towards better data, better disaggregation, also makes the problem look much worse. As we move towards better data collection, I'd encourage you to look at the Coalition's toolkit on collecting and analyzing data on attacks on education. It's on their website and it's excellent. And then finally, I think we could explore more information sharing and coordination between mechanisms. We heard a little bit about the SRSG CAC's input into the ICC's child policy. I think we can look for other examples for joint fact-finding missions, for ways for us to use information that's already collected in a way that brings more justice for children. Finally, how do we get more prosecutions? How do we have this powerful symbol of at least a few people behind bars for violating children's rights and including for education-related violations? The first recommendations in the state should simply expressly criminalize education-related crimes in domestic law, enact provisions criminalizing as a war crime any intentional attack against buildings dedicated to education, provided they haven't become military objectives, and criminalizing the severe deprivation of the right to education as a crime against humanity, a crime of persecution. Both at the international and domestic level, there are a lot of legal charges that can be brought: killing, sexual violence, abduction, recruitment from schools, all things also related to education. We think there could be more attention first to attacking buildings dedicated to education as a war crime. I'd really like to see a conviction for that at the international level. And second, the severe deprivation of the right to education as a crime against humanity. These are areas where I think progress can really be made. And just noting that, of course, there are efforts to create a new treaty on crimes against humanity, which, if it goes forward, can be extremely important for children, but it also has the opportunity to reflect new developments and new information about specifically crimes against humanity as they affect children. Finally, we need firm political will for officials to address barriers in the form of immunity or amnesty laws that prevent justice. The justice system needs to be resourced, including having the kind of multidisciplinary expertise for investigation and prosecution teams that include not just child rights expertise, but also the ability to assess weapons use or the impact of the attack, not just the attack itself, but how many children really are affected, to understand the gravity. There need to be the resources on hand for investigators to actually do their work. And that's just noting that these are often prosecutions that happen in a context where the justice system is weakened by conflict. But there's a lot more very specific things that can be done to ensure that there's more justice for children. I want to say in conclusion is to sort of note the point that was made about all of the things that children need and sort of contrasting the resources, for example, for a court versus what actually happens for children. And to acknowledge that accountability processes alone are not enough. They take a long time, and they're things that victims need absolutely immediately. I mean, if there's one thing the pandemic taught us, it was even that short interruptions of education are very harmful to children and need a swift remedy. But I will say there are other commitments in the Safe Schools Declaration and promising practice by a number of states that do exactly this. Accountability remains important. It reinforces that these are serious violations of rights that children themselves possess. The lack of accountability can undermine future peace and reconciliation, while effective accountability helps uphold the rule of law and deter future attacks. I'd like to conclude by quoting the former Special Representative of the Secretary General on Children in Armed Conflict, whose promotion of the Safe Schools Declaration has been continued and accelerated by the current SRSG Gamba. Mr. Ruby said it's very clear that deliberately attacking schools is a war crime. But when it's also clear that perpetrators will be prosecuted, many will think twice before targeting schools. And in those words, accountability may be the best defense for protecting schools and protecting children from attack. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Zama, for being so sincere with a very obscure image that we know that unfortunate children perhaps many times are not a priority. Thank you for focusing on a specific area in education that gave us the possibility also to see in details different accountability mechanisms. And finally, attacks on education are direct attacks to children, and this gives us the possibility also to work together in this area. I now have the pleasure, and I hope Khaled can connect with us. Let me present you Khaled Kusmar, who is the president of the DCI movement, but also, and he's here in this function, Director General of DCI Palestine. He is connected from Ramallah in Palestine. And what I wanted to ask Khaled, in complementarity with what he heard, is to give us his practical assessment of all these international mechanisms in terms of accountability and on violations for child rights in conflicts. He has quite a lot of examples of from many years, but also the recent ones. So how does the current state of accountability for gross violations has an impact in the field and in the actual protection of children, which is the aim? In fact, all these mechanisms are not to be presented in reports, but they have to be translated in action in the field. The floor is yours, Khaled.
Thank you very much, Alex, for giving me this opportunity to share some experience about the topic. And of course, big thanks to all the distinguished panelists for their presentations. I was listening carefully to their presentations, and I was so happy to hear and to know more about how many mechanisms that we have to protect the children in armed conflict areas. But by listening to my colleagues, really it's something bring to my mind that yes, even the title of this event is Justice for All. I not discovered already, I live it, but I see that no, justice is not for all, according to this world that we live in. Accountability, yes, there is accountability, but not for all the children. I think the case in Palestine, in particular, since 7th October until now, during the genocide that Israel implemented and committed in Gaza, and the war crimes and crimes against humanity that are committed and continuously in the West Bank. Yeah, it seems that international law is not work everywhere. Accountability is not work everywhere. So I believe that it is the test. All these accountability systems, the UN system, it's in test. If it is globally work everywhere without any discrimination, or just black and white. And unfortunately, since years and years, we are working and pushing for accountability system to be enforced. But unfortunately, I don't want to say that we failed. I don't want to see that the system failed. No, there is no political will from the states. No, I'm not mentioning all the states, but I'm only focused on those states who still controlling the system in the United Nations and most everywhere. And also they are at the same time providing the killers, providing the criminals with more and more arms to continue their crimes, as what is happening now in Gaza since months. And in the same time, talking about ceasefire. How it comes ceasefire while they are providing more and more arms to the killers? Also, how it come by talking about accountability and ceasefire while you are offer a full protection to the criminals from any accountability system? I'm happy that we managed after years and years to see using one of the mechanisms used, the CAC, by listing Israeli army in the shame list. But it came too late. Too late because we tried with all the distinguished panelists, most of them participated in the work with the Secretary General report in 2015 after the killing of more than 550 children. But it seems that in that time that 550 children is not enough to list the Israeli army in the shame list. So here passed since that time around 9 years until we reach the number maybe in the mind of the Secretary General or don't know whom, to see that more than 16,000 children killed in Gaza. So yeah, maybe now it deserves to list. Even that, nothing changed because already only they listed, but there is no further action to work to put end to these crimes. So mechanism, I see that there is a lot of mechanism. We suffer not the lack of will. We are suffering from no political will from the states themselves. If it comes to the UN system, yes, it works well and they're well documented, all the crimes, but there is no political will when it comes to the states to implement and to work accordingly in the mechanism. So from our experience, right to life, we are talking about the fundamental rights and the other rights to the children. Now we are in a place in Gaza, we are not talking about right to education. We are not talking about right to health. We are talking about right to keep survivor, the children, to keep them alive because of the bombing every day, bombing from the plane, from the air, from the sea, from the border, the lands. So now it's to find a way, food, water. So I can say that the failure of the system, not the system, because the system is okay, but the implementation of the system from the states, they cannot provide a cup of water to a child who is dying because of lack of water, or a piece of bread to keep him alive. So how I can talk about system and wasting the time in my analysis, how much it works, how much offer protection. So I think when I'm saying that this is the time, this is the test for the international system, yeah, it is a test. From my side, okay, it is very, very much frustrated, but to continue also to talk about, to answer the questions, yes, we will continue documenting these violations. We'll keep investigating these crimes against the children, and we will keep nagging on work in order to hold the criminals accountable. Because accountability, it will be the main issue to stop these crimes. But as I said, we are living in a world that from the first hand, states who are participated in creating these mechanisms, but when it comes to the implementation, no political will, because the state is protected and supported by the Western states, then there is no accountability. But in other places, this is why I'm saying black and white, yeah, it works well. So we are suffer for the implementation of these mechanisms from the double standards, black and white, from complicity. Even these states are complicit in committing these crimes by providing more and more arms to the criminals to continue their crimes, and in the same time they are protecting them from any accountability by closing the roads for any accountability system to be enforced. Even the ICC, the UK, they voted for the ceasefire in the Security Council. In politics, they are talking about stopping the war, but in the same time, they are putting obstacles and taking actions in the ICC in order to stop the recommendation of the ICC prosecutor to issue the warrant arrest against the Israeli Prime Minister and the Defense Minister. So this is how we feel as the victims of these crimes and the lack of implementation of the UN mechanism and other mechanisms. So I believe we have no other option to keep work for that, to keep documenting this violation, and we are sure we will reach a point, we will reach a day to hold the criminals accountable. But the problem is how many victims they will be killed before reaching this accountability system. How many people will suffer until we reach the accountability system in force. So I don't think that we need more and more mechanism, because already it will be blocked by the states who are disagree with, or not disagree actually, because they are partners of these crimes, continue to offer full protection to the criminals. So I'm sorry that I'm happy that I'm the last speaker, and because I don't want to make it as a tragedy, but unfortunately this is where we live. I'm happy that what is happening now, it's become very clear and recognized globally that in Israel genocide is in, and the rule, the ICJ rule, shows that genocide is in, and ask Israel to take special measures, and Israel refused to work accordingly, and then the genocide is continuous, and we see the result of the atrocities that happening now in Gaza. I'm happy that Israel now, the ICC started, but I hope that will take to be more fast in order to start stopping the impunity system that Israel army is living since years and years. And of course, this gave us more and more hope that things will never be continue like this, and accountability system will be enforced soon or later. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Khaled, and don't worry. I think it is good that you bring this voice here. As I said from the beginning, being in Geneva or in New York, or analyzing the mechanism, some things we can see them as a success, but we can fully understand that when there are 16,000 children killed, there are 17 who have no family anymore, there are thousands under the rubble or missing. There is nothing that can be compensated, even a listing or an action plan to come. But thank you for bringing this voice. Now we have around 17 minutes first to respond to some questions, and the floor is open also in the room if you want to formulate the questions to our panelists. And I have some that came from the people online. I will share with everybody so that you have them, and then those who are interested to reply from the panelists will take the floor. There was one very concrete question on how we can end, in fact, enrollment into armed groups, and what kind of actions are taken from SRH's point of view and in this context. A second one, perhaps for Najat, is if we can develop a little bit more on the interaction and concrete ways to involve with SDG 16 for children in war, and if this can be connected to the co-responsibility, co-accountability for the next 5 years for 2030, and how. And then there was a question on, for everybody, I think, for child soldiers who have eventually committed grave violations themselves, being recruited, and how we can deal with this, how we should deal with this, and how these children would be treated. And lastly, I had a question perhaps for Belgium, and it was regarding an action plan that it was initiated during the Belgian presidency, and there was some presentation, if there is any on Palestine, and if there is any follow-up or any news on this. So I don't know if perhaps Florence, you want to start with the part perhaps that the armed groups, the enrollment and the activities. I know you do a lot of things on this, on prevention in the action plans, and perhaps also on the child soldiers who are at least accused of having committed crimes.
Yes, thank you very much, Alex. I'll try to be brief. With regard to how can we prevent the recruitment of children with armed forces and armed groups, I think I mentioned several tools, such as in terms, first of all, for me, it's to ensure that the economic situation of the child in a country is sufficient, well-resourced, and he has access to education. It's to address the root cause of why a child is involved by an armed forces or an armed group. So, promoting education, ensuring that their parents have access to revenue, and so that he's not tempted to join an armed force with so address the roots factors. I think what is very important is that, first of all, the age of a child should be considered as 18 as per the Convention of the Right of the Child, because in some contexts, a child is considered an adult earlier on. And with regard to the criminalization of the grave violation, which include child recruitment by armed force and armed group. So that's all prevention tools to engage in prevention with the armed forces as well, different parties to the conflict, to ensure that they have the policy in place to not recruit children before 18. And once those children are recruited, as I said, I think the engagement with parties to the conflict at various levels through Geneva Call with the deal of commitment, for example, but also with the UN on the ground, which includes an action plan to ensure the release of children which are recruited by armed force or armed group is an excellent tool. And I said there are 200,000 children which have been released thanks to action plan signed by the UN and therefore on the ground by UN agencies and civil societies. I also believe, as it was mentioned by you, that the reintegration packages of children who have been released from armed force and who needs to be improved and tailored to the needs of the child soldiers. There we have done studies on the gap that exists of the reintegration packages which are offered to child soldiers. And there are a lot of room for improvement there. I think it was a very good point. So I'll stop there. I don't know if, yeah, any other would like to.
Thank you so much, Florence. Anybody, other panelists wants to speak on enrollment and the issue of change orders?
Yeah, maybe
Yes, Malaf.
just maybe coming back to some of the points I raised earlier on is the aspect of really how do you invest more in the recovery program? Because prosecuting the children who may have committed crime is just like re-victimizing the victim, because they were already victim, and that is established by international law, that just recruiting them is already a crime against humanity. And most often, especially in the case of Sierra Leone, it was really the design by war to use child soldiers. So they were really, really doing a lot of recruitment and giving them because they knew that they were more or less preying on their evolving capacity, which is not as mature enough as adults in terms of decision making. So really, they knew that using children can really help them even inflict more violence. So you can't prosecute children like that. Instead, let the system invest in their recovery. And what I will I will add is recovery programs, yes, they should be tailored, but even more importantly, the participation, the views, and how in that process, children can be given the opportunity to claim, to say, yes, this is what is happening, but we need more. We need, that space should be there for constant engagement so that they are not just beneficiaries of humanitarian services, but they are also actors in the process. And that's justice. It's really right. They can exercise their rights in the process. Thank you.
Thank you. Please, Jean.
I don't want to prevent us from moving on, but just to talk about sort of evidence-based prevention of child recruitment and things that we have learned about in the last few decades that we didn't know before. And that has to do in part with protecting schools from military use. And one of the consequences of military use of schools is if schools are continuing to function, is the militarization of the school environment and making it more likely that children will who are continuing to go to school will be recruited. So using the Safe Schools Declaration, implementing the guidelines that are endorsed by the Declaration on protecting schools and universities from military use, having countries simply restrict the military use of schools by their own troops and train their troops on those restrictions is one way to prevent child recruitment. But also looking at, if you have, this is where the collection of evidence and having someone actually asking what's happening to children is so important. So I'm thinking of instances where I'm thinking in Sri Lanka, where we saw children who were abducted on their way to school to fight with the rebel group called the Tamil Tigers there, and parents organizing, trying to accompany larger groups of children to make it less likely that they would be recruited. But when you have evidence about what's a risk factor, are children getting recruited on the way to school? Are they getting recruited from school? Like children I spoke with in Somalia, who were recruited by the armed group Al-Shabaab. Those are ways that you can then think about how to make school routes safer, how to make transportation safer, how to make the schools themselves safer, and try to prevent the recruitment from happening in the first place. But if you are not collecting evidence about what's happening with children, you aren't then able to have evidence-based prevention strategies for all of the grave violations.
Thank you so much. Najat, something on SDG 16 and concrete actions perhaps for the coming 5 years.
Yeah, 5 years. I'm not sure that we'll achieve it, to be very frank. But I was listening to you, and I think the SDG 16 is really to see it as a set of integrated services. All of us are selling guidance, protocols, safe to learn, safe online, safe. I think these are important, but in a concrete way. And I think it's really important at country level, not only here, in Geneva, in New York, All countries are presenting their VNR process and they are involved in it. So if we can jump on it in this process, making sure that all key stakeholders, including children, are duly participating in this. And when we are speaking on justice in its broadest sense, because enrollment, in armed conflict is linked, yes, to violence, but it's linked also to all the social disparities. And currently we have many countries, there are no conflicts. I just came from Brazil, from Costa Rica, and armed gang and armed violence is increasing. So I think it's really important to see the justice and the access to justice more widely. The other thing, when we are speaking about access and child-sensitive justice, we have to be reminded how children can report when you have no trust in institution, when you have no mechanism. So because it's easy to tell, we make to put perpetrator accountable, but we need to make sure that children are reporting. Regarding the investigation, to make sure that it's child sensitive. Regarding the length of judicial proceedings that take huge time. And regarding corruption and impunity, that could be at national level, but also at international level. So I think, and all that is in SDG 16. Participation is in SDG 16. Access to birth registration in document, justice, all this, I think it's really important. You have international mechanisms where we need to strengthen social accountabilities and mechanisms at national level and local level. We need this counterpower to be, because we can not wait, as you highlight, my colleague Khalid, the political time and this time children are not going to wait. So sorry, we are speaking, but it's happening. So I think, yes, and you already told it, we are accountable to these children, we listen, so we need really to make sure that how we can push. And we know that despite all that, it's not blaming this mechanism or this mechanism. I remind you that states are behind, and this is a big problem. The double standards are real. This is clear. So here we need, and maybe here to see how advocacy, policies, and so on. Yes, you need to all have this grave violation listing, all this. It takes time. And at the same time, I think what is important currently is thinking about while we are providing humanitarian services, the basic one, child protection is embedded in it, and gender sensitive protection. This is really important. It's a life-saving services. We are not going to provide them bread and water when it's possible. And after thinking about, protection, this is very, 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 very important. And I think for me, if we are not seeing SDG 16 and using it at national level and at global level as a tool that cut all these things, it's not going to happen, just to let you know. And we can share with you, we did a lot, and I think it's really important. 6 years are remaining, and here many countries want to accelerate. It has to be at local, national, regional, and sub-regional level, and global level. And this, if we are not using it in a practical way, really to push the agenda of policymakers, the agenda of donors, the agenda of UN, the agenda of all key stakeholders, the agenda of civil society organization, to avoid competition and really to make sure that children are in the center of our responses. This is what I.
Thank you, Nada. Sierra Leone is one of the PNRs of this year. But
so you have to. I know.
Maria Adelaide, would you like to say a few words about this question on Belgian initiative?
Yes, no, thank you, Alex. Yes, indeed, the call to action is a product of the Belgian presidency of the European Council of the European Union, which finished at the end of June. And on the text can be found online. And on the 28th of June, we had an event here with many countries participating, which marked the launch of the call to action with the European Union, Jordan, and Belgium. And the event is still online on UN Web TV. If anyone is interested, it can be watched. It's a bit longer than an hour, I think.
Thank you. So we are close to closure. Perhaps those who didn't take the floor, perhaps Bethany, or on behalf of us as civil society. I know we do also our strategic meetings on how we can be there, how we can assist, how we can contribute to this accountability mechanism. What would be the priorities in the coming years?
Good question. Yeah, I think it's true. We need to look at this as a cross-cutting issue, and we need to be breaking down the silos from what's happening in New York to national and local levels. I think one of the key things for us as civil society is to make sure that our voices are in the room and the contributions are acknowledged. And you know, thinking about the future, the upcoming Summit of the Future, and the need to get children's voices in there, it's difficult to get even civil society voices in the room. So I think it's a real priority that, you know, the ones that are implementing these are also across the border, also members of NGOs, civil societies who are present in these places and who are made up of the communities that are impacted. So I think the voices of civil society and strengthening the presence and visibility and access of civil society to a lot of these processes and spaces is a key priority, and also a key way that the voices of children will then be brought to the table as well.
Thank you so much. Any other of the speakers wanted to make? I think we need to close now because we have to leave the room. But I thank you so much for all the contributions. We will continue organizing this kind of debates in different settings. We did one in March, as you mentioned, in the Human Rights Council. Now it's a different setting, approaching SDGs. There are many other events this week on justice, and we'll make the link. Many of our speakers will be there, and we can continue the discussion there. Thank you so much, and thank you also to other people online and to Jamil, who connected from Greece.
Thank you.
Take care.